Welcome back. Glad to see you again. Are you ready for another story time? Then sit down with me. Join me for a drink. Relax, get comfortable, and enjoy these true stories about military soldiers encountering horrifying experiences while stationed in Afghanistan. Now let's begin. War leaves scars on the land, but some places were already cursed long before the first bullet was ever fired. Deep in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, there's an outpost known as OP Rock. To the military, it was just another forward observation post, nothing special, just a pile of mud brick walls in the middle of nowhere. But to the men who served there, OP Rock was something else entirely. A place where the dead never left. The unwanted presence. In 2009, British soldiers from the Welsh Guards were stationed at OP Rock. From the moment they arrived, strange things began happening. At night, soldiers reported hearing footsteps in the dust when no one was there. Some swore they saw figures moving in the dark just beyond the perimeter. But when they raised their weapons, there was nothing. Then came the whispers. Soft, unintelligible voices in the wind, sometimes in Pashto, sometimes in English. One soldier claimed he heard his own name whispered in his ear, right before his rifle jammed. At first, the officers dismissed it as exhaustion, but soon the reports became impossible to ignore. And then came the shadows, the figure in the corner. One night, a British soldier was inside a watch post, scanning the desert through his night vision scope. That's when he saw a tall figure, standing perfectly still inside the compound, in a spot where no one should be. He turned his scope away for just a second, and when he looked back, the figure was gone. He searched the area, flashlight cutting through the darkness. Nothing. But just as he turned to leave, he felt a chilling cold breath against his neck. In 2010, OP Rock was handed over to the US Marines. They had heard the rumors, but Marines don't scare easily. At least, not at first. But soon, the same eerie occurrences began again. A Marine on watch duty reported seeing a man in traditional Afghan robes standing motionless outside the wire. Thermal optics showed no heat signature. He radioed in the sighting, but when backup arrived, the figure had vanished. Then came the worst night, the night of the knocking. One evening, the entire outpost was awakened by a loud pounding on the compound walls. It sounded like someone, or something, was slamming the walls with an inhuman force. Marines rushed out with their rifles ready. But when they checked the perimeter, there was nothing there. They found no footprints and no enemy forces, just the wind. Finally, one of the Afghan interpreters told them what the locals already knew. The outpost was built on cursed ground. According to legend, a village once stood here. But during the Soviet-Afghan War, Soviet soldiers massacred the villagers, leaving their bodies to rot in the sun. Before that, in the 1800s, British troops fought and died on this very soil. The land, the interpreter whispered, was soaked in blood, and those who died in violence never left. To this day, soldiers who served at OP Rock refuse to talk about what they saw, and those who do say the same thing. The dead are still there, watching, waiting. Have you heard of this one? The Phantom of Helmand Province. This story was featured on the television series Paranormal Witness in Season 4. The episode was about the paranormal experiences encountered by U.S. Marines at Observation Post Rock, known as OP Rock, in Afghanistan's Helmand Province. Shall we begin? War is terrifying enough on its own, but in some places, the battlefield holds more than just the living. Soldiers in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, have whispered stories of something else lurking in the shadows. Not an enemy force, not a drone overhead, something older, something watching. This is the story of the Phantom of Helmand Province, a soldier's encounter with the unknown. The year was 2010. A squad of U.S. Marines had been stationed at an abandoned compound near Sangin, a place notorious for some of the bloodiest fighting in the war. The structure was ancient, made of crumbling mud brick walls that had stood for centuries, long before any modern war touched these lands. From the moment they arrived, the Marines felt uneasy. At night, strange sounds echoed through the compound, footsteps where no one stood, a low whispering that seemed to come from the walls themselves. At first, they dismissed it, the wind, the stress, their own nerves playing tricks on them. But then, one night, something happened that none of them could explain. The shadow in the hallway, Lance Corporal James Carter was on watch duty, patrolling the outer perimeter. The only sound was the crunch of his boots on dry earth, until he heard it. A shuffling sound. Inside the compound. His radio crackled. Another Marine on the far side had heard it too. Thinking it might be an enemy infiltrator, Carter moved carefully into the hallway, his rifle raised. The corridor was empty, but the air was different, thicker, charged with something he couldn't describe. Then, from the far end of the hall, a figure appeared. At first, Carter thought it was another Marine, but something was wrong. The figure stood motionless, just a shadow in the dim light. "Who's there?" he called out. No response. He flicked on his weapon light, but there was no one there. The hallway was empty. He turned to leave, and that's when he felt it. Cold breath against his neck. A hand, not flesh and blood, but something weightless, brushing against his shoulder. Carter spun around, raising his rifle, but he was alone. That night he didn't sleep, and he wasn't the only one. The vanishing soldier. The next evening, Carter and his squad mate, Private Mason, decided to set up a night watch, one man awake while the other slept. Mason took first watch. But sometime in the early hours, Carter woke up to find Mason gone. His rifle was still there, his gear untouched. But Mason vanished. Panic set in. The squad immediately launched a search. They checked every inch of the compound, calling out his name. Then, just as the first light of dawn broke over the desert, they found him. Mason was standing in the middle of the courtyard, facing away from them, completely still. When they approached, he didn't respond. His face was pale, his eyes distant, like he wasn't there. When they shook him, he finally blinked, confused. "What's going on?" he mumbled. He had no memory of leaving his post, no memory of walking outside. All he remembered was falling asleep and hearing a whisper in his ear. A whisper saying, from outside, the local legend. The Marines never spoke about what happened again. But later, they heard a chilling rumor from a local villager. The compound they had occupied, it wasn't just an old building. It was cursed. Centuries ago, it had been a prison where people were left to die. Some said their spirits never left, and some, even now, still wandered the halls, looking for someone to take their place. A warning from the dead. Did Carter and his squad experience a haunting? Or was it simply the stress of war playing tricks on their minds? Maybe we'll never know. But those who've spent time in Helmand Province, they say the land itself remembers. And if you listen closely on a quiet desert night, you might just hear the whispers calling you outside. Here's one more super weird story about an event some US soldiers are purported to have experienced in Afghanistan. Maybe you've heard it. In 2002, deep in the rugged mountains of Kandahar, Afghanistan, a US Special Forces unit set out on a special patrol. Their mission was straightforward: to find out what happened to a missing patrol unit in the mountains of Kandahar. But what they encountered that day was something that would never make it into official reports. One of the men who would later speak of this event was a soldier known only as Mr. K. His identity, along with others involved, was allegedly classified under strict orders of secrecy. Years later, after his service, Mr. K and another unnamed serviceman would recount the chilling details of that fateful day. The unit was moving along a goat path through a remote area when they stumbled upon a distressing sight. Scattered gear from the missing soldiers, broken communications equipment, and signs of a violent struggle painted a grim picture. But there were no bodies, just emptiness, as if something had taken them. But as they moved further down this mountainous path, they approached the mouth of a dark cave with a steep drop-off just inside the entrance. In front of the cave were various bones, some of which looked human. Suddenly, from the mouth of a cave emerged a creature, or a person, unlike anything they had ever seen. A giant, standing at least 12 to 15 feet tall, with fiery red hair, deep-set eyes, and a beard that stretched down its chest. It was clad in primitive leather-like garments, and in its hands it wielded a massive spear, easily capable of skewering a man in one thrust. Before anyone could react, the giant attacked. With terrifying speed, it impaled one of the soldiers, identified only as Dan, lifting him off the ground effortlessly. The team opened fire, unleashing everything they had: M4 carbines, 50 caliber machine guns, and a grenade launcher. The battle raged for nearly 30 seconds, an eternity in combat. Finally, after relentless gunfire, the creature collapsed, lifeless. The soldiers approached cautiously, confirming what they could hardly believe. It was a massive humanoid, estimated to weigh over 1,100 pounds. Its feet had 6 toes, and its fingers bore 6 digits each, with long, dirty, gnarled nails. The man smelled horribly. Shortly after the battle, a helicopter was called in. A specialized unit arrived to airlift the body away, its destination unknown. According to Mr. K, the soldiers were debriefed and sworn to secrecy, their experiences buried beneath layers of classified reports. The government, he claimed, did not want this story getting out. For years, silence reigned. But there are many that said that unofficially, this was somewhat of an open secret. Many military and ex-military employees had heard about this. A story this weird made its way around, but yet would not be acknowledged officially. Mr. K would later testify in an interview that the military knew more than they were letting on, that this wasn't the first time such a being had been encountered. Other servicemen, anonymous but credible, came forward with similar claims. Officially, the US government has never acknowledged the event. No records of missing soldiers match the descriptions. No reports of such a giant exist in military archives. Skeptics dismiss the story as a fabrication, a myth born from the stress of war. And yet, those who were there, those who claim to have seen it with their own eyes, tell a different story. Included in the description below is a link to the audio of an interview where Mr. K tells his story to author and filmmaker L.A. Marzulli. Be sure to check it out on Global Net, Spiritual Domains channel below. We hope you enjoyed these allegedly true but disturbing stories. If you like stories of the fascinating and strange, please like and subscribe. Be sure to click the bell icon so you can easily find our videos.